Let's talk about using ensembles, because if you don't use them, they're useless. Let's talk about one of the most basic possible ways to use your ensemble, and that is adding flavor. This is a very simple writing technique that is most useful to non-writers, and by that I mean people who haven't taken writing classes. A lot of indie devs are first-timers, at least in terms of writing, and they have cool ideas in their heads, but they might not be real sure how to make the player realize how cool those ideas are. For example, I'm going to make a Ren'Py game about vampires. And so I have this cool vampire murder that happens, and you have to investigate it, and then there's like this werewolf on the scene, and you have to worry about that, and then there's this cool vampire castle that you find. Oh, but someone in the vampire castle just went out into the sunlight and exploded, but you don't know who it was, because it's just ash now, so you have to try and figure out who died. Look, there's more werewolves and stuff happening here, and oh no, the vampire castle just exploded, and now there's a boss fight. To me, the writer, these are cool. Every single one of these events pops. It has impact, it's fun, it's exciting, it makes sense. But communicating those things to the player takes skill. The player can't read my mind. And this is where things often fall apart, because a lot of times you'll put stuff on screen and just assume that the player will think it is as cool as you think it is. For example, our exploding vampire castle. This is like the crux of our third act or something. Boom, 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 cool vampire castle explosions, boom. But when we get there, we realize we don't have like $1,000 to hire an artist to draw an exploding vampire castle or anything, so we're really going to have to settle. We're going to have to like MS Paint some fire and some smoke onto our vampire castle icon or something, and then mostly rely on text to sell it or something similar. It's just a constraint of how we're going to have to build this game. We just do not have the resources to really make this an extravaganza. But it is the beating heart of our third act, so we need to make it land. How do we do that? We use our ensemble, that's why it's there. If the player watches this castle explode and then turns to their left and sees their friend from the beginning of the game, the mullet vampire, the mullet vampire will be like, oh no, this is extremely bad. The vampires are done, man. There's no more vampire castle. We're screwed. We are done. That's it. Oh no. The player now understands how they're supposed to feel about the exploding vampire castle because there is a character on screen feeling something. That's a great way to tell the player how to feel. They can look at someone feeling something and understand what their relative feelings are supposed to be. Similarly, if the end boss is in this castle going, oh no, I'm allergic to exploding castles, and blows up and dies, you're like, yeah, we got him. We killed that end boss in that exploding castle. That was great. How epic. So what we're trying to communicate is quite different depending on the character that we put into the scene, which is literally the point. That's the whole point of having an ensemble. Every character has a different flavor and can be used to add flavors to different scenes in different ways. Any vampire in our ensemble could show up at this exploding castle and have something interesting to say that would change how the player feels about the exploding castle. This is an extremely simple way to start to create the flavors in your game, and it's something you should do before you finalize your characters, because it may turn out that you do not have the exact characters you need to give the flavors that you want. Maybe it turns out that you don't have this vampire person in your ensemble. Well, go back and add them. Put them back in Chapter 1. Have them show up in Chapter 1 so that the player understands who they are and what their relationship is. Maybe you find out that that character has a lot of really good flavor for the middle of Chapter 1 and the beginning of Chapter 2 and stuff like that. This is the point. We're putting together our story out of distinct character flavors. As the writer, we might have cool ideas, a progression that works, but we need to add the flavor that allows the player to come to terms with it and understand how it's supposed to taste. Obviously, this is not the only way to make these scenes matter, but it is a very powerful and easy way, and it uses ensembles, which is what we're talking about, so that's what we're going to do. Let's talk about some of the catches, though. One of the catches is that we have to make sure that the player understands what they're supposed to feel regardless of how they feel about the character. Dave likes Vampire McMullet. When Vampire McMullet starts to panic about the exploding vampire castle, Dave says, oh, okay, well, I better step up and protect my friend. But Anna thinks this is the worst character in the game. She says it's the Jar Jar Binks of the vampire game world, and she wants him dead. So when he panics about the exploding castle, Anna literally bursts out laughing and thinks that this is awesome. This is the best thing that's ever happened. She's so glad that this guy is now scared and is going to die horribly in the streets somewhere. She's a good friend, as you can see. Similarly, Dave thinks that this bad guy was really bad and is super glad to see him exploding into flames. Anna, on the other hand, thought that he was the hottest character in the game and actually assumed that he was going to be a romance option, and she is totally gutted that you killed off the only character that she cares about. The problem is that if we set this up indelicately, if we set it up without thinking about it, we end up giving different flavors to different players, and they interpret the scenes in different ways because they care different ways about these characters. What we actually need here is a foundation that works regardless of how the player feels about the character. So in this case, when we have our vampire buddy over here, our Scooby-Doo vampire, panicking over the castle, we're not trying to communicate that our friend is panicking. We're trying to communicate that the normal, everyday schlub vampire is now screwed. His role in this scene is not our friend. His role in the scene is the everyday vampire, the normal vampire, the common vampire. Whether we like him or hate him, we'll understand that the normal vampire is now really screwed, and it's time to put on our pants, our big boy vampire pants, and step up to the plate. Doesn't matter whether we like him as a friend or hate him as a friend or think that he's Jar Jar Binks, we understand that he is the every vampire, and that is where the plot has gone. Similarly, when this bad guy dies, we want to play up the fact that this is the bad guy dying, not a specific hot character dying. Obviously, we do include the fact that he is that specific hot character, but we really hammer home the fact that this is him paying for his crimes or being removed due to his threats or whatever, right? We have to allow the fundamental story essence, the reality of these characters within the world of the game, to take front stage, because we don't know how the player character actually thinks about these characters. It's very hard to make every single person care the same way about every single character. A good example of that would be in Mass Effect. I know that a lot of people really liked that blue lady, but a lot of people really hated her. And you can't rely on the character or the player to like that character, because a lot of people thought that she was just pandering. And it got worse in Mass Effect 3, where they put in that real-world reporter. That was very weird and creepy, but some people loved it. Because of our distinct opinions on these characters, we interpret the scenes they show up in quite differently, and in many cases we would either avoid or chase those scenes. So this is something you do have to take into account. It does matter if the player thinks that, Vampire Mullet Man is a good friend or the worst character in the game. It does matter. But it's something you can't rely on. So when you use these characters in your scenes, you want to try and make sure that if it's an important scene that the player can't skip, their essence is what matters, not how the player thinks about them. Okay? Another problem with adding flavors is that a lot of games allow the player to choose who goes where, who goes with them, who shows up, who their best friend is. So if the player looks to the side in this exploding castle and sees party member A, whichever party member they chose, now you have a problem, because you have to write 8 different opinions for 8 different potential party members, and they have to all lead the same place. They all have to be, oh no, this is terrible for the ordinary vampire, but an opportunity for us. every single one of them has to be able to deliver that same exact message, but in their own way with their own flavor. That is an interesting writing challenge, and I'm not saying you should avoid it, but you have to understand that every time the player gets to choose who shows up, you're going to have a hard time making the same things happen, because every character has a very distinct flavor, and that means the scenes unfold in very distinct ways. Moreover, in many cases it would make more sense for the ensemble characters to show up in other places. Like, the player doesn't look left and see the vampire boss next to them commenting on the exploding castle. They might, if that's what you want to write, but it would make more sense if the vampire boss was out in front going, "Ha ha ha! Finally, my plans are coming to fruition. I have burned down the Vampire King's castle, and I am now the new Vampire King." Not every character has to be slotted into the exact same physical performance. The player doesn't always look left to see the character that they brought with them. That character can go anywhere. That character can show up in any way you want them to show up in. And that can mean that they show up even if the player didn't select them. The player might have brought, mullet head vampire friend with them, but maybe you need vampire boss buddy to show up and say some lines. That's fine. You can just put them in there. Just have the flavor you want to have. These are problems with the way that the game unfolds, where if you give the player control, you have to understand how much control you're giving them and when you're going to have to take that control away. If you are trying to make them have an opinion on a character, you have to understand they might not have that opinion, and you have to build your scenes such that even if they have the opposite opinion of that character, they still get the same plot events, they still get the same core flavor. And those are the big constraints about using your ensemble, and this is why you should start to plan this stuff out before finalizing your characters. Because you may need to adjust exactly who your characters are so they can actually help you deliver the flavors that you need to deliver. This is all very basic in terms of how you approach it. Obviously, it might make more sense to a lot of writers to start to think about things like proper theming, or how these characters can further the plot in a smooth way and stuff like that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things. I am saying that this is a very easy way to start to have your scenes connect to the player emotionally. That's it.